Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10 and support the channel at the same time. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 2 of our 6-part Dominaria Limited Set review. Today we're going to look at all of the blue cards as well as some of the multicolor cards in the set. If you saw yesterday's video, you know what to expect here. We looked at all the white cards. We're going to look at each card individually. We're going to talk about how they fit into the sealed and draft formats, and also what archetypes you may want to think about, how the colors relate to each other, and how each individual card could perform depending on which deck you put it in. Now, with that being said, quickly before we get started, just a really fast reminder, if you check out the description below, you'll find a few ways to help support what we do here at the channel, one of which is our Patreon page. You'll see that below. Also, you'll find some links to products on Amazon. If you make any purchases on Amazon, once you go through that first link, no matter what it is, we'll get a small percentage. Finally, Flipside Gaming still offering a promo code for our viewers where you can hopefully save some cash while you support the channel. Again, thank you to everybody, not just the folks that look at those links, but to all the viewers. Y'all make the channel what it is, and let's get into it. Let's begin with an overview on how blue fits into this set. Blue has a couple focuses, one of which is historic/artifacts. You're going to notice that as we go through. All colors do dabble in historic, but blue and white by far are the ones most interested in casting historic spells. So take note of that as we look at individual cards today. Now, beyond that, blue is also very instant and sorcery-centric, as you could expect. That also has a tie-in this time, though, with the wizard tribe, and that's going to be great for Izzet. So let's look at some of the color pairings and how blue kind of fits into the entire set landscape. First, on your far left, you see an example of a white and blue card. Again, like I mentioned, very historic-centric. In black and blue, blue kind of becomes a support color for what black's trying to do. Now, the card on the screen maybe isn't the best example of that. However, what black does in this set is things like reanimation. They can bring cards back from the graveyard to the hands. And blue has some self-mill and also some counter magic and control to kind of support what black's trying to do. Izzet colors, like I just mentioned, wizards and instants and sorceries. The card you see on the screen right now is a perfect example of what blue and red can do together. And then finally, the Simic colors, green and blue. Green is very land-centric this time around, and blue, of course, is going to hopefully allow you to draw cards, get to your lands, push some lands into the graveyard, even with a self-mill. That can be relevant. So again, the card you see on the screen is very indicative of what the colors are trying to do together. All right, let's get into the individual cards. And we'll start off with Academy Drake. This is fine and limited. You know, this might not always make your cut. It's kind of funny. Basically, a blue 2/2/2 flyer is a Windrake. Back in the day, like, Windrakes were some of the best creatures. As power has kind of crept into creatures anyway, Windrakes don't feel as amazing anymore. Still very, very runnable, but sometimes you might have better stuff. Now, this one also has the kicker. So if you draw this later in the game, you still have the opportunity to have it mean more. The problem is it doesn't actually mean all that much more, because now it's going to become a 4/4 flyer, and it's costing you a blue and 6. That's very expensive. And by the time you can cast it for a blue and 6, a 4/4 flyer might even be not quite as good as it would have been a turn or two ago. But with that being said, a 4/4 flyer is never going to be bad, especially in sealed. You can play this card and be happy with it, I think, most of the time. Academy Journey Mage. Okay, this one is a wizard, so make mental note of that, because if you're going through your sealed pool or you're drafting, look for synergies with red especially. Now, wizards will give me these cards all the time, where I get to bounce a creature and play a creature. They've casted them at all different casting costs. They've given them all different powers and toughnesses and abilities. And you know what? I always play them, and I'm always really happy with them. So if I have a wizard in play, then, okay, this costs 1 less. That's great. But even if I don't and I pay 5 for this, I'm actually not too sad about that. I kind of wish I could target my own creatures as well. Unfortunately, this time around, it's only opponent's creatures, but I'm still fine with that. Being able to bounce my opponent's best creature and get a 3/2, that's pretty sweet. And there's actually some good tokens and stuff in the set, too, where bounce will actually take care of a problem for you from time to time. But even if that's not the case, a 3/2 giving you board presence while taking away presence and tempoing your opponent is pretty awesome. I'll play this all the time, actually. And this is a common. You'll be able to find these, and maybe, in some packs even, first pickable. The Antiquities War. Okay, this card is all about artifacts. You have to be all in on artifacts if you're going to play this thing, though. That's the only problem with it. If you're not really heavy into artifacts, just skip this one. But if you draft, this is probably more of a draft than a sealed card. If you draft a blue artifact deck, then yeah, this card all of a sudden becomes very, very playable. It could be really good for you, potentially. but it's going to take a really focused draft to make this good. Arcane Flights. Okay, well, here's a really simple aura. And we are going to see a hexproof creature in a little bit. Hexproof creatures make auras that much better, so I do want to point that out. This is also very cheap. So if I have a big creature that just doesn't have evasion, a lot of times you'll find that in green, for example, and I just need to push across damage, even if it's just for one turn, stuff like this is actually helpful. Now, you don't want to get 2 for 1, be smart, but at least you're only paying 1 for this. And if you can give a big old creature flying and it survives 1 turn even, you probably got more than your money's worth. Even if they chump block it with a flyer, yeah, it's going to pay for itself. Don't feel bad about this particular aura. I think the economy behind it is actually good. I don't want to fill my deck with these things, but I'll run one of these. Maybe even 2 sometimes, depending on my build. Artificer's Assistant. Do you have historic spells? Then play this. Okay, so now if you don't have enough triggers for this, don't play it, because you don't want a 1/1 flyer for 1. That's not good enough. But if you have a fair amount of historic spells, and again, that can be artifacts, legendaries, or sagas, then run this, because scrying is really, really good. If you can scry 2, 3, 4 times over the course of the game, this is going to more than pay for itself, easily for 1 mana. If you don't feel confident that you're going to hit these triggers, then play something else. Befuddle. Okay, I kind of like these little blue combat tricks. This one is especially interesting to me because I can kind of get my opponent with this sometimes in combat. It also replaces itself, so that's kind of nice. It only costs 3 mana too, that's not bad. Now, we saw Evra yesterday in white, and if your opponent's playing Evra and you play this at the right time, you actually could win the game. So keep that in mind. If your opponent throws an Evra down in game 1 and you have this in your sideboard, definitely bring it in if it wasn't already in your main deck. The other thing I want to point out with instant and sorcery spells, if you're in the Izzet colors especially, there are payoffs for having extra instants and sorceries. I know a lot of the time the limited games tend to be a little more creature focused, but there are some really good cards to have that play along with instants and sorceries. So if you happen to have any of those cards, all of a sudden cards like this do get that much better. So don't forget that as we go through today's cards as well. Blink of an Eye. This is another really good instant. This card's actually the same as Into the Royal, which if you ever played with that back in the day, it's a fantastic card. Being able to return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So that could be your stuff, your opponent's stuff, anything, non-lands, it can hit. So that's great because it can disrupt board state, maybe bounce a big creature that your opponent controls. It can save one of your own creatures. You could bounce another problematic permanent on the battlefield, as long as it's not a land, of course. Or you could maybe bounce one of your things, replay it for a enters battlefield effect. There's just so much you can do. And the kicker is very reasonable. If you pay 2 blue and 2, you also get the cantrips. So that's actually kind of sweet. Fantastic card here. Exactly what blue wants to do. Cloud Reader Sphinx. This is actually a really good blue creature. 3/4 flyer for 5. I mean, normally you would say I'd rather have a 4/4 flyer for 5. However, when it enters the battlefield, it scries 2, and that goes a long way. I'm a big fan of scry, and if I can scry 2, I'll take 1 less point of power. I have no problem with that, especially in blue. I'd rather have 1 less point of power than 1 less point of toughness, as a matter of fact. It makes the creature more durable. So, yeah, this is actually really good. Now, maybe I don't want to run more than 1 of these in the 5 spot necessarily, because you're going to have other good high drops in your deck, probably, both sealed and draft. In this set, there's a lot of crazy things. But I'll run one of these and be super happy with it. Coldwater Snapper. Now, this is a little expensive. Costs 6 for a 4/5. It is splashable, which you might want to take note of because it's hexproof. Hexproof is phenomenal if you have ways to pump the creature, auras. This makes auras so much better. So if you happen to have a lot of good auras, maybe in your sealed pool, or perhaps you were drafting and you draft this early and you want to pick up a bunch of auras, that could actually be a strategy, even if you're not in blue as your core color and this is just a splash. So keep that in mind. Now, without doing something special with this card, a 4/5 for 6 isn't amazing. It doesn't have evasion. So you're going to want to find some way to enhance this. You want to give it evasion if you can. You want to pump it when you can. So if you have those things available to you, wonderful, go for it. Sometimes in a vacuum, it might not make your deck if you don't have enough triggers that are going to make this better, even if it's temporary. You might say, you know what, I got better things that cost me 6 that I can play instead of this. Because ultimately, if you just attack with this, it can be blocked by like a 3/3 and a 2/2. That's not the worst thing in the world. But for 6 mana, you kind of want something better than that, I think. So in those cases, skip it. But a lot of the time, you're going to find things to do with this. Curator's Ward. Okay, this is kind of an interesting aura, as a matter of fact, speaking of which. Now, this gives a permanent hexproof, and it's enchant any permanent. So that's actually kind of cool. Now, don't disregard that last portion, though. If the permanent leaves the battlefield, you get to draw 2 cards. Sometimes you might get this and actually just want to draw the cards. So let's say I'm in blue-black, and I have a creature that is a sack outlet, because there's a few of them in black. We'll see those when we get to the black part of the review. But let's say I just have some tokens, or like a 2/2 in play or something. I can throw that on the creature, then sacrifice it, and draw the 2 cards for 3 mana. That's not so bad, actually. Maybe the sacrifice might have a cost too, depending on what card it is, but yeah, you know what? I'm happy with that. Also, a bounce spell is another way to do it, because actually leaving the battlefield is what causes the trigger. Other times, if I'm later in the game and I have the bomb creature, or like whatever it is, doesn't even have to be a creature, but I have this bomb card in play, it could be a planeswalker if I'm lucky, I don't know, and I don't want anything to happen to it, I can protect it with this. We mentioned in yesterday's video, Shalai might be a good target for this. So it's versatile, it's not very expensive, and it's good early, it's good late. Yeah, this is actually a pretty decent card. I wouldn't want to go crazy with this thing necessarily and start filling my deck with these. You don't want to flood into these things. But having one in my deck, I think I would find some good utility for it at some point. Deep Freeze. You know, sometimes blue is just really desperate for some kind of removal spell. This is a very desperate removal spell because, yes, it gets rid of a problem. It can take away flying or trample or just a big creature. Or maybe best of all, a good ability on a creature. But it turns it into a 0/4 wall. So, okay, now I'm going to have trouble getting across with that wall. Now, granted, a lot of blue creatures fly, so maybe it won't be an issue for you some of the time. And you know what? Sometimes this is going to be your best option, especially in sealed. So if that's the case, you play it. If you have better removal spells, though, then yeah, you can skip this one and just go with something else. Diligent Excavator. Okay, this one's kind of interesting. This is a mill card. And let's talk about mill first. Is mill a viable strategy to mill out your opponent? Maybe in draft, but it's not going to be super consistent. Now, let's say you're able to pick one of these up, maybe 2 of these, and some other mill cards, because we're going to look at a few others. And you also can get a whole bunch of artifacts, for example, and you just play like blue artifact. And all your stuff's historic, basically. You have a lot of legendary creatures, maybe some sagas, and a bunch of artifacts. And you think you can trigger these things repeatedly? Well, I don't know. I wouldn't be one to say don't go for it, because I know I would go for it. Would I win? I don't know, probably not. But I would go for it, because I think it would be super fun. So it is possible, but I think it's going to be really difficult to make work. Now, where mill does get interesting for me in this set is self-mill. I do think you can find value there. Now, let's talk about this card individually. If I'm in blue-black, there's reanimation in black, so populating my graveyard makes sense. If I'm in blue-green, lands matter, and even lands in graveyard actually do matter from time to time, so there are cards that you'll find synergies with this. Even white has a way to reanimate small creatures that we saw yesterday, so there are things you can definitely do out of the graveyard in this set, and that becomes intriguing to me. Now, the other thing I have to point out about this card is the trigger is based on historic spells. So if you don't have a lot of historics in your deck, then maybe it's not worth running this, because at the end of the day, it's a 1/3 for 2. Perhaps good against aggro, though, so if you come up against a really aggressive deck, you might side it in because it is a 1/3. But other than that, I don't see myself just running it if I don't have ways to exploit the ability and have ways to trigger it. So that makes the card a little more narrow. So it might not always see play, but it's there when you need it, and sometimes it could actually be quite good. Divination. Alright, this is a reprint. We've seen it many times before, and of course this is actually a pretty good limited card. Not a great draw spell for like standard or anything, but in limited, I'm okay for sorcery speed draw spells for 3. They'll let me draw 2 cards. It's just fine. I'll probably run one of these. Sometimes you might even have better draw spells, but you know what? This one is great. I'll play it. Homrid Explorer. Here's another mill card. This one costs 4 for 3/3. So even if you're not interested in the milling aspect, a 3/3 for 4, it's kind of on par. It's not bad. It's not great. Sometimes it's just a curve filler, especially in sealed. But if you are interested in milling when it enters the battlefield, target player does put 4 cards from their library into their graveyard. Again, maybe it works in conjunction with some sort of draft plan to mill out your opponent, but I think most of the time you just mill yourself with this in black and green. There are flicker effects as well in the set, a few of them here and there, so that could be relevant from time to time. Imbolas's Clutches. Alright, this one's an uncommon. It feels very rare to me, though. As a matter of fact, in limited, these type of effects can be extremely powerful. So this is first pickable in a lot of packs for me, as a matter of fact. If you ever played even cubes with like Mind Control or Control Magic, you kind of know what these things can do. And they just really take a board state and sometimes switch and reverse who's in control. Because basically, you take your opponent, in this case, best permanent. It's any permanent. That's awesome. You take it, and now it's yours, and you turn it against them. That's actually a big swing sometimes. So, yeah, I'm going to play this. It costs 6. You're paying for it, but I actually think it's very, very worth it. And you don't want to necessarily run multiples of this all the time, considering it is legendary. However, you know, I'll be honest with you. I can see myself, if I happen to grab 2 of these, maybe running 2. No more than that, though, for sure. 6 starts to get a little expensive. But I do think if I can get this like on turn 6 or 7, it could be a huge play. Karn's Temporal Sundering. Okay, this is a legendary sorcery. This is the one for blue. Beautiful art, by the way. Noah Bradley knocked it out of the park with all of his art in this set. And this card, though, is it's good if you have a way to cast it. The trick with these legendary sorceries are you have to have a legendary creature or planeswalker in play before you can cast it. So it has some startup cost to it. Now, this is a time walk that also lets you bounce something, a non-land permanent, for 4. So I actually kind of like that. I'm always one to bounce something. There's a lot of things you can do with that, because again, it doesn't say what you have to target as far as opponent yourself. It's just a non-land permanent. And more importantly, taking an extra turn sometimes can slam the door on a game, depending on your board state. Or sometimes it's just draw a card if you're behind, right? So there's times where it's not as good as other times. But it's always worth running, as long as you feel like you're comfortable enough with the amount of legendary creatures, or if you're real lucky, planeswalkers, that you have in your pool. And if that's the case, go for it. If you don't think you're going to be able to cast this routinely when it comes up, when you draw it, then I would probably skip it. Merfolk Trickster. Okay, this card is going to be phenomenal in constructed formats. I think this sees play in Standard as well as especially Modern, Legacy, and even Vintage. This card is awesome. With that being said, we're not here to talk about those things. We're here to talk about Limited. Is it good here? Yeah, it's good here too. It is 2 on color. I mean, it's a tad annoying, but it's doing a lot of good stuff for you. A 2/2 flash. There's a fair amount of flash creatures in blue, which is definitely worth noting, especially if you're in Is It colors and you're playing a lot of instants or something like that. So this particular one is also a wizard, so remember that. Wizard synergies is a thing. And beyond that, being able to flash this into play, tap down one of your opponent's creatures, and also take their abilities away for the turn could be huge at the right time, right? Or if you're on the aggressive end, then maybe at the end of your opponent's turn, you just tap down their best blocker and you just go in for a big attack. So yeah, this card's versatile, it's cheap, it's fantastic. The Miari Conjecture. Okay, so you glance at this and you say, well, 5 casting costs, and a lot of times limited decks are very creature-centric, so I don't know, does this feel good? But the more I think about it, I'm going to say to myself, even if I'm in the most creature-centric limited deck, you know I'm going to be playing some removal spells, right? They're going to be instants or sorceries most of the time. So, could I use this even if I just pay 5 and it said recur 1 removal spell from your graveyard, and that's all it did that was relevant? Would that be worth it? I actually think it would. And I could see myself playing this. I could even see myself splashing this if I'm not necessarily in blue, because removal spells are that much of a premium in draft and seals. If I can get one of mine back at the right time, it could actually win me the game every once in a while. I'm going to go for it. I think this card is actually a lot better and limited than you might think it is. And if you happen to get 2 cards back, well, even better. And if you can fork them later, well, wonderful. But again, I'm not even concerned about that. Just getting back removal spell might be good enough a lot of the time. Granted, this card's not always going to do the bonkers things it could do in like Commander or some constructed build, sure. But I think it's good enough. I think it's good enough to run. It gets better in Is It, obviously, because there are more instants and sorceries. There's more rewards for playing them. So the card could actually be really strong in a deck you draft around those synergies. But even if that's not the case, I think you can still run this. Naban, Dean of Iteration. Okay, now this is a wizard, right? So wizard synergies, first off. Secondly, if a wizard enters the battlefield under your control, triggering a permanent you control, you get to get an additional trigger. That's kind of sweet. There's actually things you can do with that. But here's the bottom line with this card. If you have wizards, play this. It will probably be good for you if you have those synergies. If you don't play this, because a 2/1 for 2, you can do better. There's enough 2/2s for 2 in this set that you don't need to go 2/1 and have an ability that's not doing you any good, right? So, yeah, it will be good some of the time, especially in Is It, but other times it is going to be a card you'll skip. Naru Maha, Master Wizard. Okay, now this plays well with the previous card. This is a mythic, though. You're not going to see it very often. But if you get it and you can pick up some wizards to go along with this will be great for you. First off, it's another flash creature, and it's a wizard on its own, so those are all important things. 3/3 for 4, he can sneak it into play, surprise your opponent, that's always good. And when this enters the battlefield, copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. Now, that's a little problematic because whatever you played, you're going to have to cast that first and then cast this. That starts to get a little expensive. Now, in a drawn-out game, it's very possible, though, right? And you might be able to fork a removal spell or something like that, or even a burn spell. That might feel good, but sometimes you're just going to play this as a 3/3 gotcha in combat or something like that. The other thing that's cool, though, is this is an Anthem effect for all your other wizards. That's super sweet. So, again, if you have wizards, this card makes a lot of sense. If you don't, though, this one is still not bad for you because the flash is actually very relevant. And the fact that maybe you'll be able to fork a spell at some point is also still relevant, whether you have other wizards or not. This does play, of course, with the previous card we saw because it does have a enters the battlefield trigger on it. That's cool. So, yeah, ultimately, this is a decent pickup. Now, like I said, unfortunately, it's Mythic. So don't rely on putting the wizard deck together and grabbing this in pack 3 or something to buff everybody. It's probably not going to happen. But when it does show up, maybe you get this in pack 1 and you can build around it. It could be a lot of fun. And even in sealed, you'll find things to do with this. Opt. Okay, here's a card you're probably pretty familiar with. It was in the Ixalan block as well. And if you played with this in Limited there, you know it's actually pretty decent. Scrying is very good. Scrying and cantripping is great. It only costs 1 instant speed. And don't underestimate the fact, again, that instants and sorceries do matter in the set with the Izzet colors. You're going to see more of that when we look at red in a few days. So, yes, this card is good on its own, but it gets better in certain situations where you can actually have other cards looking for instants and sorceries. So, yeah, this is definitely runnable, and it just makes your deck more efficient. It's a great card to have. Precognition Field. This one's not really exciting for me. It's a 4-drop enchantment that doesn't really do anything on its own. You do get to look at the top card of your library once it comes into play, and you can play instant and sorceries off the top of your library. So as long as that's what's on top, it's like having an extra card in your hand, so that's cool. You can also pay mana to exile cards off your library to try to get to something. So you don't want to underestimate that too, especially if you're digging for a certain answer, even if it's not an instant or sorcery. So the card is not the worst thing in the world, but I'll be honest with you, do I ever see myself playing this? Maybe if I'm really all in on Izzet, instants and sorceries and wizards, maybe. But again, it's probably more of a draft deck than a sealed deck, and again, just that casting cost just feels like it's a little too much for me, considering the ability is either going to cost me more mana if I want to exile more cards, or it's going to be very high variance. Relic Runner. Here's another card that is good with Historic, so probably plays well with that white-blue build more than anything, but it doesn't have to be. Even like Blue Artifact or something will be good. And a 2/1 for 2, again, if you don't have ways to trigger the ability, probably skip this one. But if you have enough Historic, then yeah, getting in for a couple damage here and there is definitely not a bad thing. Maybe you can pump this up at some point too, so yeah, it can be runnable in those builds. Rescue. Here's another reprint. This is another really cheap instant. Make note of that for the Instant Sorcery Matters cards. Now, aside from that, returning target permanent to your hand, it's got to be something you control, for just 1 mana at instant speed can be very, very good. It can protect your stuff. Maybe you have an enters the battlefield trigger, you want to play again. This is a real cheap way to do that. So I like the versatility here. This is a fine card to run one of in a deck when you can. Sage of Latnam. Okay, here's another card that kind of plays with artifacts. This is a reprint as well, originally from Antiquities. Now, this card on its own is not exciting. A 1/2 for 2. Even the ability actually isn't super exciting because it's so slow. Like, it doesn't have haste, so you have to wait until it doesn't have summoning sickness. Then you have to tap it, sack an artifact to draw a card. I love drawing cards, but it feels like a month before I'm going to get there. Now, maybe I'm being a little overly dramatic perhaps with this. Definitely runnable if you have a lot of artifacts. If you're in the blue artifact deck, I would certainly run this because it could lead to value for you, and that's a good thing. It's just not going to be very fast value. So other than that, though, if I don't have a lot of artifacts that I'm interested in sacrificing, I'm definitely skipping this. Sentinel of the Pearl Trident. I really wanted this to be like a Merfolk Lord. It's not, though. But this costs 5. It does have flash. It's a 3/3, so sometimes you'll play it just for those reasons, especially in sealed. That could be okay for you. Now, it does have an Enters the Battlefield ability, basically letting you flicker an historic permanent. So, yeah, that can be good if you have ones that have good Enters the Battlefield effects or something like that, or you need to protect a historic permanent because this does have flash. So, yeah, especially in white-blue, this gets better. But again, if you have targets for this, yeah, it's not a bad card. And even if you don't, a 3/3 for 5 with flash sometimes can surprise your opponent. Slyn Voda, the Rising Deep. Okay, this is expensive, but it's big. I mean, you're paying 2 blue and 6 for an 8/8, even if you ignore the kicker. That's sizable, and I don't mind doing that because, sealed draft games, sometimes they do go long, you have board stalls. Getting an 8/8 on the battlefield for 8 is not horrible. Even if your opponent decides to joint block this thing and get rid of it, they're probably losing like 3 creatures, and if you 3 for 1 with this, that's not the worst thing in the world by any means. So, yeah, it's real runnable. I wouldn't put more than 1 in my deck. This is that uncommon, which is kind of interesting, but I don't think any more than 1. Now, sometimes it is relevant to kick it, and it might even help you win a game. You never know. It is very expensive, though. Then you're talking 3 blue and 7, and you have to make sure you can swing 3 blue, because not all decks will be able to do that. You don't want to maybe be splashing blue and playing this for sure. So, yeah, if you can feel comfortable with the casting cost in your deck, maybe this is a little bit better in Simic colors because you have the ramp behind it in green, and a lot of the other ways to get lands into play faster. This card probably does get a lot better. Kicker just generally gets a lot better in green. In fact, green and red are really focused on kicker, although you will find it in all the colors. Now, sometimes bouncing all those things other than Merfolk, Krakens, Leviathans, Octopus, and Serpents is not really always the best thing for you either. So you do have to kind of take that into account. There's going to be moments where that might hurt you more than it hurts your opponent. But regardless, it's still a fine creature to run, especially if you can ramp into it. Syncopate. Here's another reprint. This is actually another really nice Exile counterspell. I always like the Exiles when you can do it. Now, this one is a little mana intensive. Again, you could argue maybe this is a little bit better in Simic colors where you have the extra mana available to you. But this is another very runnable spell. The thing with counter magic that I always like to point out is it does 2 things. Some of the time, it's good in lieu of removal spells, because a lot of times this is kind of like blue removal. If you don't have a lot of removal, check and see what kind of counter magic you have as a backup. It's not always quite the same, but it can be good, especially if you have a lot of flash creatures or draw spells and such to go behind it. Now, the other thing to remember is you don't want to necessarily push these all into every deck, because if you're playing an aggro build, like maybe red with a lot of small creatures and you're splashing blue or something, and you're throwing in too many counter spells, you're diluting the aggro strategy. So don't try to be kind of a jack of all trades. Try to use your best cards that are also going to synergize together. Now, in sealed, sometimes you don't have as many options, and you kind of have what you have. In draft, though, you definitely don't want to be all over the board. Your deck will be a lot weaker than others in the field. Tempest Gin. Okay, now this is another one of the 3 casting cost on color cards that are a complete cycle, all 5 of them in the set. We saw the white one yesterday. This one's also very good for limited. It's kind of funny because it gets +1/+0 for each basic island you control, which is kind of a drawback in constructed magic, because a lot of times you're going to play lands that give you blue mana that aren't islands. In limited, though, it's not much of a drawback at all. You're mostly playing islands, I'm sure, if you're in blue. So the only thing you have to consider is it is 3 blues. So if you're splashing blue, I'd probably avoid this. But if you're at least 40% blue, this is going to be good for you. The card is actually phenomenal. Even if you play it on turn 4, let's say you finally get your 3rd island on turn 4, then this comes down as a 3/4. Even if you're attacking on turn 5 with a 3/4 flyer, that's pretty good. There's times where it might even be better. And if you go into the blue artifact build or something like that, then this card is even more reliable. Yeah, this card has the potential to come in a lot bigger than it should be at times for the turn you play it. Sometimes that alone will win you a game. Tetsuko Mazama Fugitive. I really like this card. This is a sweet build around me card, especially for draft, and you'll find synergies in sealed too. On its own, it's unblockable, although I probably wouldn't play it on its own if I don't have a lot of small creatures. If I have a bunch of 2/2s, but no 2/1s or 1/2s or 1/1s, yeah, most of the time I'll probably skip this unless I have a real good reason to want to play this and make it unblockable on its own. Now, aside from that, though, if you do have the pieces to make this great, this card could be really annoying because imagine playing, even with white, you have some soldier tokens, there's a 2/1 we saw yesterday. There's a lot of things you could do with this. Red has goblin tokens and some small aggro creatures. You're going to find even in green sapperling tokens. There's a lot of directions you can go with this card, especially if you pick it early in a draft. Time of Ice. This is a great saga. I actually love this saga. This is one I want to play and try out because it's forecasting costs. And again, you have to think, what if something happens to the saga? Is it still economical? Yes, this one is still very economical. Because, tapping down a creature until this goes away for 4 mana, even if something happens to it before it gets to 2, is not bad. I mean, it's not amazing, but it's not bad. But then the chance that you're going to be able to tap down another creature the next turn, Okay, now you're talking. If that 3 resolves, even if your opponent doesn't have anything else tapped, which hopefully they'll know better and won't, unless they're really trying to race you, then you're going to bounce at least the 2 creatures that you already tapped down. Great tempo play there. Amazing tempo play, actually. Do remember, though, if any of your creatures are tapped, they are bounced too. Normally that won't be an issue, though, since it typically will resolve shortly after you untap. But just something to keep in mind. Beyond that, there's other things that tap creatures in the set, so you might even be able to get them with something else at some point. But yeah, this is really annoying. They have to kind of either be well ahead on board state to survive this, or they have to be able to like get rid of it or deal with it in some way, or continue to put creatures out. But I imagine there's times that this will close the door on a game. And you know, you have to think of it this way. I said this yesterday. Yeah, there are things that destroy enchantments in the set, but you can't worry about that. If you have a good card like this, just play it. What happens, happens. If your opponent is able to stop it before it gets to 2, well, then good for them. But if they didn't, then you're going to have a big play on your hands. Tellurian Scholar. Okay, this, of course, was the Professor's first preview card in week 1 of the previews. And the big joke was that the card wasn't very good. So is it very good? Well, it's not great. It's a wizard, so sometimes that will matter for wizard synergies. That's one reason you might think about playing it. It's also a curve filler, like for sealed especially. Like a 2/3 for 3 is not the worst thing in the world. It's not great. If you play it, you're probably not super happy, especially in draft. You kind of don't want to play this in draft. You really, hopefully, would have picked up a better 3-drop. But again, if you're into wizards or maybe just need a 2/3 for 3, it's there for you. Unwind. This is a very good counterspell. It's a non-creature counterspell, so again, you kind of think to yourself, well, you know, there's so many creatures in limited. Is this great? There are times where it'll be annoying because your opponent feels like they're never playing anything but a creature. But you know there's going to be instant and sorcery removal spells coming at you. You know there's going to be artifacts. So you know there's going to be sagas. There's so many great targets for this for 3. And it's splashable. That's important too. Yeah, I'd be happy to play this. Again, as long as I'm not going hyper aggro or something and I don't want a creature in lieu of this, as long as I'm being a little more methodical and controlling, this will be great. And you can untap 3 lands. Phenomenal ability on that. So that means you can follow this up with another play. Maybe one of those flash creatures, another counterspell, something along those lines. So there's a lot of utility here in this card. Valdelian Arcanist. I would play this all the time, actually. It's a 1/3 for 2. It's a nice blocker against aggro. And, okay, I can tap it for a colorless mana. I can only use it for instants or sorceries. But again, even if I'm very creature-centric, which in blue, you know you're going to have some instants and sorceries, right? So, yeah, it might just be a removal spell here and there, but if it's going to help me accelerate a little bit, I'm all for it. So, yeah, this is a very good blue card. As a matter of fact, I'd rather get a 1/3 in blue for 2 sometimes than a 2/2, because blue is trying to be a little slower, a little more methodical, trying to gum up the ground a little more. This card does that for you. This could be a little bit better in the Izzet decks, of course, where instants and sorceries are more important. But I can see myself playing this a lot of the time. Oh, and by the way, on top of everything else, this thing's a wizard. A real cheap wizard to put in the battlefield. Weight of Memory. Here's another mill card for you, if you're keeping track. This one costs 5. It's a sorcery speed draw spell. So, again, for like standard or something, that's not great. But in limited, it's okay. I wouldn't want to go overboard, obviously, with these, unless I'm trying to like mill my opponent or something. But yeah, for 5, it does get a little weighty, but drawing 3 cards is always amazing. And milling yourself for 3, in most cases, is what you'll do probably, as opposed to your opponent. And again, great for blue-black, great for blue-green. This sometimes will feel like a draw 6, maybe, or at least a draw 5, right? So that could be awesome in the right build. Other than that, though, even if I'm not doing stuff out of the graveyard, drawing 3 cards is still fine. Please allow me to retort. All right, Wizard's Retort. Now, this card is a cancel, unless you control a wizard, then it's a counterspell. Both are good. Counterspell's amazing. Cancel's good. In limited, you're happy to play a cancel. You're enthusiastic about playing a counterspell. So, yeah, if you have wizards, this gets better. If you don't, it's still very playable. Again, if you're looking for counter magic, great option for you. Zahid, Djinn of the Lamp. Okay, I really like this card. 5/6 for 6, 2 blue and 4, so it's basically a Mahamodi Djinn. However, if you have an artifact in play, you can pay a blue and 3 for this instead. That's awesome. First off, amazing top-down design, like the genie's coming out of the artifact, I guess, like the genie of the lamp. And secondly, getting a 5/6 flyer on like turn 4, that sometimes could be game ending. So Yeah, this is really amazing, especially if you have other artifacts, obviously. Now, is it runnable at the 6th spot? Yeah, you know, if you drop this and turn 6 or 7, it's still pretty good. Opponent might have an answer by then, but still, I'd go for it. Aside from that, though, if you can get this out in turn 4 or 5, you're going to be having a real good day. Might be really strong in like a blue artifact build, or just if you have a fair amount of artifacts and you can cheat this in every once in a while, still great. Alright, let's look at some multicolor cards. We have Rona, Disciple of Gix. This is okay for some builds, maybe. I'm not super high on this card, though. It's a 2/2 for 3, 2 different colors. I don't like that. Then, if you have a historic card in your graveyard when it enters the battlefield, you're able to exile it, and then you can actually recast it whenever you want, as long as this is still around. So, alright, that's good, but not amazing, necessarily, because it's a little high variance. And then after that, you can pay 4, tap it, exile the top card of your library, and at that point, you can play those cards. So, okay, it's really slow, though. I mean, 4 is asking a lot of mana and tapping this to do it. I almost feel like maybe if it was 5 and a mana sink, that would have felt a little better even. I don't know, maybe not. But if I can exile the top card of my library, if it's a non-land card, it kind of feels like it's in my hand now. But I paid 4 to do it, so next turn I probably can't really do this again if I want to cast things, at least most of the time. So that doesn't feel great. It helps me dig for something, but again, it helps me dig really slowly. So I wouldn't fault somebody for playing this. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, but I feel like I'm going to have better things in the set a lot of the time, just more reliable, consistent things. Eliezer the Cinderwind. Okay, you want an Izzet card that is representing what Izzet wants to do? This is the card. First off, I love the creature stats just on its own. A 2/2 flying haste for 3, even though it's 2 different colors. Very aggressive, it gets in there and fights. I like that a lot. However, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, all your wizards, including this one, will get +1/+1 till end of turn. So even if you only have this out as a wizard, still, casting a spell, instant or sorcery, buffs it. And that makes it even better considering how fast it is and has evasion. I really like this. Of course, in conjunction with wizards, it gets better because it's going to buff your other wizards, at least temporarily. And again, better with other instants and sorceries too. Perfect for Izzet. It is a build around me card for those colors for sure. Joyra, Weatherlight Captain. Alright, this card is a mythic. You're not going to see a lot in Limited. But if you have the opportunity to play with this and you can make these colors work, you should do it because this is incredible. Now the trigger is you do have to cast a historic spell. I don't think that's a real big issue, especially for draft, but even sealed. There is a legendary spot in each pack, we know that. As a matter of fact, with the pre-release, you're going to get an additional promo card, which is going to be legendary, so that's kind of nice. I think there's going to be options there. Between artifacts, legendaries, and sagas, I don't think that's going to be a problem. Even if you trigger this thing 2-3 times in a game, it's going to be awesome value for you. Now, a lot of times I'll say when I'm drafting, I don't always like to first pick a dual color card because it starts to sort of pigeonhole me a little bit, so I either have to force colors harder or I have to give up my first pick, so it's not always where you want to be. But when you see something this good, just go for it because this card is amazing. And you can also splash one of the other colors too. If you can't stay in Izzet, and you're in blue or red, like very splashable, that's kind of nice. And again, just the value you're going to find here is incredible. This is mythic, at least partially, due to the fact that this will be very, very powerful in Limited. Muldrotha the Graveside. Okay, this is the last card we'll look at today. It's Sultai colors. And that's the worst news here. Well, other than it's mythic and you won't see it a lot either in Limited, unfortunately. But aside from that, the fact that it is 3 different colors, it's a little harder to cast. So there are times you might be in your seal pool and you just can't get there, unfortunately. Although green is one of the colors that will help you to maybe get there some of the time. But if you can pull this off, this thing is a bomb. 6/6 creature, first off, for 6 converted mana. That's nice, even though, yes, I know 3 colors. During each of your turns, you may play up to 1 permanent card of each permanent type from your graveyard. That's insane. Like, this is fantastic. Obviously, it's going to work well with mill as well, so that's kind of cool since it has blue in the casting cost. But even regardless, I mean, it's perfect for those colors, right? Blue wants to mill, green wants the lands in the graveyard, black wants the creatures in the graveyard, and they just all work together and you just do amazing things with this thing. So, yeah, it is kind of incredible. And even though I know this is a limited review, I just have to say it. I can't wait to play this in Commander. It's going to be incredible there too. So, yeah, amazing card. This is a fantastic inclusion in the set. Even if you don't ever get a chance to play it in sealed or draft, I'm glad this thing is here. It's going to be amazing. All right, with that being said, those are the cards for today. Now, tomorrow we're going to do our market watch for the week. Tomorrow's Saturday. And if I can get the next part out, we're going to look at the black cards. It will either be really late on Saturday or really early on Sunday. One of the two, I'll get it out. But we'll keep moving through the colors. Definitely have it all done before the pre-release, so you'll be ready for that event. But until next time, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.